a couple of minutes early, but that just means that we get extra content, right? So, this is the High Fantasy track. Welcome. This panel is for Brandon Sanderson's Laws of Magic. This panel is not about hemalurgy or the cognitive realm or any of that stuff. This is not a Cosmere-focused panel. This is about Brandon writing as an author for other authors about his laws of how magic should be used in your fantasy work. So if you're expecting a bunch of Cosmere trivia, I'm sorry, this will be even better than that. Okay? My name is Billy Todd. We were just heckled a moment ago by somebody in the front row who asked, where is your book? I am not an author. I am a Sanderson person. My professional expertise goes so far as I wrote an article for Tor.com about Wheel of Time. That's about it. So that puts me way below the rest of this panel here. I will start off with LH Nicole, who sits here.
Hi, so microphones. Hi. So I'm LH Nicole. I write young adult fantasy. My current series is a King Arthur continuation in modern times. So I'm a huge, huge myth geek.
Hey everyone, I'm Dakota Kravitz. So I write in game lit and lit RPG. I am the owner and president of MountainDalePress.com. Sorry, very tired. Mountaindale Press, yes. And we now publish authors within our own genre, which is awesome. To be here, I have put out a bunch of books so far, and I'll just leave it at that, and people can ask questions if they don't know.
I'm Jennifer St. Giles. I write in a multiple of genres, from romantic suspense to military suspense to paranormal crime to paranormal, I guess, werewolves, and then also I write gothic historicals. And I write under different, I guess, pseudonyms. I can't decide who I am.
My name is Joshua Palmatier. I'm published by Daw Books. I have 9 novels out so far, 3 trilogies, all of them fantasies that rely heavily on rules for magic. And I also founded a small press called Zombies Need Brains, and we do themed anthologies, and we fund them with Kickstarters, and we have a Kickstarter going on right now, ends in about 5 days, and so if you're into Kickstarters, into themed anthologies, I have some cards up here, you can pick them up and check them out at the end. We could really use your help to get funded for this next one.
Hi, I'm Alaron Kong.
Gnomes rule.
So I'm Alaron Kong. I'm a physician by training, but about 4 years ago I started writing sci-fi fantasy books. I write in the same genre as this handsome man right there. Lit RPG combines video games and sci-fi fantasy. I have 7 bestsellers out. I am Audible's customer favorite of the year, and I have about 100,000 5-star reviews. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Wow.
If you had a mic, you could drop it. Okay, so I guess we'll start off with a definition. This is a pretty important definition to go with. We're here to discuss Sanderson's Laws of Magic. Magic, what does that mean? The idea of does it have to be wizards? Does it have to be sorcery? Can it be technology? How does that work? You guys, why don't we? We'll go ahead and start with you, Dakota. Go for it.
So for me, what magic is a way for the reader to understand what is happening in the book. So I'm a fan of the hard magic laws. So if you've seen Brandon Sanderson's first law, it talks about the differences between soft and hard magic. I'm a big fan of the hard magic, where it says when you are using magic, it is explicitly stated why you are using it. And if you don't understand it, or if your reader doesn't understand it, then it's not really supposed to be used, because that's what it is. The use of magic is directly proportional to the understanding of the reader.
That's right. That's exactly correct. An author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic.
That was close.
You were pretty That's right. So when we discuss magic and things like that, what we're talking about is, I guess, the stuff that's unique to this universe that doesn't belong to ours, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
There's no difference between there's no difference between Gandalf's staff and Superman's eyeballs in that sense. They're both magic. Right?
See, but I mean, I think that's a great point, right? Like my favorite quote about magic is when he's talking about that, you know, if you go far enough, magic and science are indistinguishable. So like as we move forward, that definition of magic like will shift, you know, which I love.
Right.
I think magic is also, I'm sorry, I think magic is also a good term to use for things that maybe we don't necessarily understand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of things that we have now, medicines and stuff, were considered potions or, you know, witchy maleficiums back in the day, and now that it's science, it's proven, it's just stuff we don't yet understand.
So a moment ago, Dakota was explaining sort of the spectrum that Brandon uses when he talks about magic, and he sets it up as a dichotomy sort of between soft magic at one end, hard magic at the other, where soft magic is, soft magic he defines as magic that you don't really know the rules of, and it just sort of shows up and is in the background of the universe, like in Tolkien. Tolkien's the example he uses. It shows up, but you don't really know how it works. Hard magic, on the other hand, is something like Asimov's Robot Laws, where those are the example he gives, where you know how these rules work, and then seeing how they interplay in the rest of the world is sort of a thing. So I'm curious, Joshua, why don't you give me an idea of how do you prefer magic to show up on that spectrum?
Okay, well, first of all, my day job is I'm a mathematician. So in any of mine, I prefer that there are laws of magic, very, very explicit laws of magic. So my system is usually worked out and has all these rules, and you know they obey certain properties and all that kind of stuff, because that's the mathematics side of me basically coming into play. But when I'm writing, the laws aren't necessarily right up front, right on the first page. A lot of the time, the character is discovering the laws as the story progresses, and I like to do that because it kind of takes the reader along with it. They don't have to have like a guidebook right before they start, so the main character is learning the rules along with the reader at the same time. So even though I have very specific laws and I know exactly how all of my magic systems work, at the beginning of the book, you might not feel that way, right? Because the main character that you're following doesn't necessarily understand or know all of the rules for that particular magic.
So I guess I'll go ahead and lay out what the other two official rules are for Sanderson's Rules of Magic, which are, the first one is, as we said a second ago, an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. So the more the magic is used, the better the reader should understand it. The second law is limitations are better than powers. Limitations are more interesting than powers. And the third one is expand, don't add. So expand on what a power can do, don't add a new power. There's more that we can go into with each of those, but those are the big three. There's also a secret fourth law, the zeros law, which we'll get to in a minute. But I'm interested. I'm interested to hear from Jennifer. When you're writing your werewolves, are they soft? Are they hard? I can only assume.
They're hard.
I can only assume. It's you can go whichever way you want. It's 10 o'clock now. Is it a soft system, a hard system? How does that work for
It's
you?
pretty much a hard system. I take, they use their magic to solve problems, so it's hard. Also, I feel that magic is a tool for both your character and your writer. Your writer can use magic to kind of like torture your character because you give him limitations with his magic and problems and I guess conflicts when he uses the magic causes issues and problems. So not only does it cause your reader to have more empathy into your character by giving these torture type of experiences with magic, but it also I think allows you as a writer to get deeper into your character by using magic to solve problems. I don't know if that. So I'm hard.
Okay. What about you, Alron?
So I write in Lit RPG, and one of the definitions is that there has to be a clearly definable progression for the character and for the magic systems.
Right.
So like the hardest.
Right. Like, very crunchy, I'm sure.
Yeah, very much so.
If you can assign numbers to it, if you can assign numbers to it, it's probably a hard system.
Yeah.
Right.
Does it last longer than 4 hours?
Consult your physician. Lasts more than 4 hours. What about limitations? I mean, particularly you're writing for a game system, limitations are extremely important because you have to balance the game and all those sorts of things. Why don't you talk about that for a second?
No, I'd actually say that's one of the most important parts about being a good lit RPG author. I mean, anyone that here that's game knows that, like, while it's great to grind and get stronger, like, once you can beat everyone, it's like, well, what's the point of the game? It's the exact same thing, I think, with most books, but definitely for lit RPG. Yes. So when you're, like, creating a system, you can't, like, marry Sue the character too much. Otherwise, you know, nobody wants to just see someone, like, wave their hand and beat everybody all the time. So it's, like, kind of actually one of the #1 things for me.
Yeah, Brandon gives the example of Superman is interesting, but only when he has to make hard choices.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Superman has 2 weaknesses. He has 2 limitations: kryptonite and his moral code. And if he has to choose between 2 people to save, that choice is what makes Superman interesting. Not the fact that he can smack anybody in the face that he wants to. It's the fact that he has to choose which face to go smack or which building to go keep from crashing.
Yeah.
Dakota, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. So one of the great things about writing in lit RPG is that we can kill our characters and bring them back. So, but yeah, but in a respawn fashion, right? So you know right when you're coming back. So one of the best things to do to progress your abilities is to test the limitations, and you get closer and closer to finding the limit, and then your skill level increases. Right, you find maybe a new facet of how you can use your magic, or it does something extra, like your fireball hits an extra 5 feet in diameter, right? Just because you've kind of condensed that magic. But if you go past and you break that law that you have set for that level, for that skill, you blow yourself up, and usually into meaty chunks. So, yes, and then
There's consequences.
Yes, and then you pop right back up. Several hours later, perhaps. Maybe you're out money, gold, stuff, and then there's consequences for having done that, and that's one of the more important things in our genre, is making sure that you can do new things, but there's consequences for doing so.
So there are different kinds of limitations you can put on a power, right?
Yes.
On a magic system, you can do, you can have, like you said, my fireball only goes 25 feet in diameter. If only it went 30, then I could possibly solve this problem. Then I could rob the bank if only it was bigger. That's one limitation. Another one is weaknesses, right? Like Superman has a weakness. And then there are also costs. I can't cast the spell if I don't have magic roots or whatever. I guess I'm interested, LH, which way do you think is, which of those routes are you drawn to for limitation?
I always go, there's a cost for everything, and I think that's true in life. But so like for the Legendary Saga, you can't, like almost anyone can use magic, but you have to have either a connection to the element, or you have to give up some part of your energy, or something has to be given for you to be able to use it. Same thing like when they're trying to cross realms, you can't just bop in from anywhere. You actually have to find, not all the realms are connected, so you may have to go to Avalon to get to the underworld. So I think there has to be limitations, otherwise it is just Superman, and consequences. It's no fun having power if you can just do whatever, whenever.
And just a housekeeping note, I forgot to say this at the beginning. If anybody in the crowd has questions, you can feel free to ask. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand, and our volunteers will run a microphone to you, and you can pipe up. That's fine. Just please wait until you're called on. Thank you. I'm curious, Joshua, on that question. The question of which way do you like to limit your powers? Do you do it by cost? Do you do it? How does that work for you?
I think honestly the best approach is to mix it all. So maybe you can create a fireball that's larger, but it's going to cost you so much that basically it becomes impossible. So I like to take all of those possibilities and kind of play them off against each other. So in the long run, though, I think it's the cost that's going to affect the book the most, because then you can bring in a lot of moral implications. Like, oh, I could do this, but it's gonna, like if your magic requires that you sacrifice a life.
Right.
All of a sudden you've got not just magic and how much it's going to cost, but now you've got all these moral implications involved with it as well.
And that sort of leads into the third law, which is do we have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So, on your Dungeon Born, because he's a dungeon, he can create anything, any mana. So do you assign hard numbers to the materials to give him a limitation, or do you have a chart, or how do you work that out?
I have spreadsheets for days. I not only do I have to check and make sure he's found the material that he's trying to use for the thing. I had to find things that he can put power through. A good chunk of his limitation is how much can he bring to his physical location, because writing a character without legs or arms or a way to move around tends to make it hard to go and hunt for resources.
Right.
So if you, I assume you've read through that series.
Right.
A lot of what he does is he kind of gives quests to people. He says, "Hey, go and find these things for me, and I will reward you greatly. Like, bring me back new animals so that I can make new variations on creatures. Bring me back jewels and materials so that I can make them for myself and make these really powerful, really cool weapons for you, totally for you, not for me to use against you, I promise."
So I thought we had a raised hand over there. Yeah, there. Keep your hand up. If you had a question, keep your hand up. There you go. So the microphone can get to you. There we go. Oh.
So I'm actually kind of new with this idea, and I kind of like fall into the tropes of. I know you just touched about the different kind of materials and things for magic and everything like that. But who's pointing to? I came in late, so I don't know what his name is. But my question is I know kind of the standard is energy, but what other options are there aside from maybe material or anything like that you can use as cost for magic?
Sure. So something I do in this series here. So I'm really not trying to say self-promote here, but in this one, what I do is I follow a stat sheet that is similar to what you can see in Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I say I have a certain amount of intelligence, right? That gives me a mana pool. It's clearly defined how much mana a spell is used, to cast it. And so I had to have a certain level of intelligence or items that reduce things, reduce the cost. I need a certain amount of willpower or wisdom in order to regenerate mana fast enough to not wipe myself out while casting a spell. I need a certain kind of constitution so that my body doesn't give out. I need high enough strength that I can carry the materials. And all of these are issues that come up in the book so your physical body can be a huge limitation to the kind of magic you can cast. And that's, of course, beyond the materials that you need in order to use the magic. So usually I try to have at least 3 things that are difficult. So a scarcity of resource, a scarcity of physical ability, and a scarcity of actual magical aptitude. So,
does anybody else have a comment for that?
Well, I think paranormal gifts, being able to see the future, or being able to read people's minds, or being able to be an empath in a situation, and being able to see what happened in the past, I think those are magic in themselves. And I think that by using those within a person who has no actual magical ability to carry a heavy burden or to see like Superman sees or something like that creates a situation that has a lot of angst to it, because they're given this burden to do these things, yet they don't have the supernatural strengths to do them. So I think that's in a different way.
I'll say my favorite thing with cost is actually long-term consequences. So I mean, you could have a magic that makes you have a harder time controlling your temper, or it could be something as germane as when you said to sacrifice the person, you do it one time and you're doing it to save some people, and you make that moral leap, and then the next time it's a few less people, and the next time, and then by the time you're sacrificing people regularly, are you the same person? It's not a consequence built into the magic, but it's a consequence built into our humanity, and I love it when those kind of things can interplay.
If you do it once, it's a tragedy. If you do it multiple times, you're the necromancer.
Yeah.
I mean, basically all of them boil down to mental costs. Dakota was talking about physical costs, and that's usually the most common, right? Is that there's some kind of physical cost. You pass out after you've done magic, or something like that. But I think what they're all hinting at is basically a mental cost, whether it's short term or whether it's long term. it's another way to bring in a cost to the magic.
Yeah.
Another very famous example is Wheel of Time. Sardine makes whales go actually insane
Yeah.
the more it's used, right? That's another one.
And Britton Weeks had an amazing where basically this guy was able to regenerate and rebirth himself, but he didn't know that every time he did it, a loved one. Oh, sorry, super spoiled.
Spoiler sign, not quite there yet.
Okay, sorry, never mind.
And going on the mental costs, like Nick Martell has a book coming out next year, and the cost for magic there is that you lose your memory. So, there's literally probably thousands of different kinds of costs out there. You just have to figure out which one you want to use and then figure out how to manipulate that to create tension in your story.
Never-ending story
And
part
improve
2.
the characterization of your spellcaster.
Yeah.
So let's go with this question back here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could give us an idea of how much you have figured out in your magic system before you start writing. Like, are you spending the majority of your time figuring out the magic system and then writing's pretty easy, or does it evolve as you're writing, or
Can I
give us an
Before
idea?
the panel answers, I will now interject with Sanderson's 0th law, okay, which is err on the side of awesome. Okay? When you're setting up your rules, Sanderson says, make sure you leave yourself room to where if you have to violate the rules because it's just so awesome for the story that you can do that. Okay, so having now revealed Sanderson's 0th law, I'm now very interested in the panel's answer to that question. And LH, I think you're biting this one.
So when I was writing Legendary, I had a lot of stuff planned out. I like to joke, both of my closet walls were completely covered with rules and breakdowns and timelines. And so yes, it's always, like I said, leave room to expand and grow. Especially as everything develops, but I mean, I had a lot of stuff in place, the basic rules, how it has to work, the systems it has to follow, the consequences, the costs, all of it. And then again, it kind of gets personalized to each character, and then at the story as it goes.
Panel, anybody else have an answer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you wish.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll go down the line. I'm sure all of you are very interested to answer that question.
So my background is actually in computer science. So I have a degree in computer science and programming. I did that for a few years. So a lot of what I do is based off of what I would have done as a programmer. Face this way, you guys aren't getting involved. So what I would do is when I sat down, I started working on the system, and I said, how far can I push these things? Like, where can I go with this? And how far can my character push this before it breaks the system? And so with Lit RPG, one of the things is that the system, unlike many other genres, is the system trumps story most of the time. And so for me, it was because I can push my character until something breaks and he explodes into meaty chunks. He can test those limits and push them and become a lot stronger. So I'm sorry, yes, this is your question, sorry. So for the, what I do is I set up the system, and then I try to set everything up, like, digging ditches, right? You're gonna go out there, you're gonna measure the ditch, you're gonna get a wheelbarrow, you're gonna get a shovel, and when you're finally ready to go, you just go, and you dig that ditch, and then you move on, right? And then you're on to the next one. And that's kind of how I see setting up the system and running with the story.
And sometimes when you're doing it, sometimes you just have to get into it and then start letting your imagination take flight. And then after that, you can kind of bring things back into shape. But if you enter into a project feeling limited, then you don't know where you can go and how much you can accomplish. So, like with me, I was writing like Gothic historicals, and Pocket came to me and said, we wanted werewolves and not Gothic historicals, and I'm going, excuse me? So I sort of kind of let myself, and this was on a Friday that they let me know, and so by Monday I had a proposal on their desk, and they bought it, but they said, okay, we'll take this, but we don't want this, this, and this, and this. So I kind of had put myself into all the lore that I was going to do and everything, and they said, no, we don't want that. but we'll take the book, all right, but we don't want what you wrote, you know? So, and they were desperate for werewolves, I guess. Anyway, so, but for that series, I just had to do it by the seat of my pants, and what I had turned in, something that was religiously based on the descendants of King Solomon. And my editor had not read it until it went into production, and then she calls me, and she goes, oh, no, we can't do this. So as it's going into production, I am faxing them sheets, rewriting the whole basis of the magic of my book. And so, to me, I didn't have it all laid out to begin with. I had to build it, you know, like quick. And then, and then as I got into more books in the series, that I could go in and build more of the lore and the magic in it. But it had to happen fast for me.
And even though I'm a mathematician, pretty much all of my writing is I'm a pantser. So I don't outline, I don't plan anything ahead. I just kind of have a rough idea when I start of what the magic system is sort of like. Like, I know I'm going to use ley lines in one set of books, or, you know, something along those lines. And so for most of mine, it's I'm writing basically to discover the magic system and discover what the limitations are of the magic system. The book that I just finished and my agent just has, that one though, I had to, well, that one I based the magic system off of a mathematical structure I did my dissertation on. So that one I already had the system itself laid out. But that's an exception. Normally I don't know what the magic limitations are, or even sometimes what the costs are going to be until I start writing, and then I kind of like feel it out as I go along. By the end of the book though, I figured out what my rules are going to be, and so during the rewrite, you know, I make sure everything fits the rules that kind of developed as I was writing the novels. So revisions are very, very important for making a magic system consistent.
I think Jen pointed out a good point. Like, so I'm an indie author, and at least for the one you were talking about, that was traditional. So like with your traditional, obviously you have more than one cook in the kitchen, so they're, you know, they get to have input obviously in what you're doing to a greater or lesser extent. As a indie, we can write whatever we want. We probably should not, but but we can. For me, I am a mix of like pantser and plotter, because that's basically what you say. Like, are you a plotter where everything is lined out, or are you pantser by you fly by the seat of your pants? What?
Planter.
Yeah, there you go. So with me, I would spend like a ridiculous amount of time like looking things up and like checking out the physics of stuff and doing the numbers, being like, no one's ever really gonna care about this, until I found my tribe and they're like, hey man, no, your numbers are off by like 0.03. You know, I mean, depending on like, you know, what we're doing, it's very like number intensive, and like our fans are super loyal, but they will land on you. Like, they love finding something that you missed, and they will post it everywhere. So you kind of want to like, you know, do both. My advice would be plot out enough that you're not just shoehorning something in later, but have no fear of letting it evolve into a more natural way.
We have a question here. This incredibly well-dressed dude, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a question based on something Dakota said earlier, and it's kind of a two-parter, but the first thing I want to ask about is, you said you do tons of spreadsheets. One, how do you keep up with that? And the other part of that is for Aileron, because in your book, your plots and your subplots are a part of your magic in your world. So do you go back and review what you've written before to make sure you don't miss anything, or do you fly by the seat of your pants?
Me first? Okay. So I definitely go back and review, which is fun, because sometimes I'll like read something like, oh, that was hilarious. And other times I'm like, man, that did not land. So for me, I was very clear that I wanted in video game terms, I wanted a sandbox style world. I did not want a guy where he got one quest and it leads to the next quest and it resolves whatever. I wanted it to be real life, where you get this amazing quest, and then people are like, where is it coming from? I was like, I don't know. Where would you find the next key of something, something, something? you know? So some of the things are meant to dangle, some of the things are meant to drive my fans insane because I just thought it was funny. Some of the things are meant to be Easter eggs that like were in like the second chapter of book 1 and then 7, and I'm like, yeah, you know? So it's a mix, right? And I like that uncertainty, and I think it makes it more fun. Personally, some people it drives crazy, which is also more fun.
Dakota.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of the spreadsheets, so it does help that I have a degree in keeping track of spreadsheets, essentially. But a good chunk of what I do is if I make one change, it updates everything. So I have everything from character interaction sheets, so like where a character is, like a couple lines that say what that character's motivation is and where they should be by the next time they are seen, so that like I can just, oh, this character, oh, yep, okay, right here. And this, she wanted to be an elite guard. Perfect. By then, she's in training. So that's how I keep up with my characters, and then everything from stats and stuff like that. If it impacts something that already exists, I have a separate tab where I add that cell in. So I change one thing, it changes everything, and so I have to be very careful not to hit backspace ever. So lock yourselves. That's right.
Back up.
So quick question first. Nobody's gonna care about like spoilers for Aragon or for the Kingkiller Chronicles, right? First book, Kingkiller Chronicles. Everybody should have read that by now.
I've never heard of that one.
It's good. You should read it.
I would ask.
Okay.
I would ask you to phrase your question in a way that doesn't.
Okay, it's only about the magic systems that.
Okay. Go.
Yeah. So, basically, I see a lot with fantasy lit and like sci-fi stuff where you've got this magic system where in Aragon and in The Name of the Wind, when Quoth learns sympathy and when Aragon learns the elven magic, that it takes a lot out of them unless they draw from something else. And I'm also hearing that from a couple of like tiny points elsewhere. I was wondering if there were other ways that are unique to your books that you kind of nerf your characters so that they're not like overpowered like Superman, like you were talking about.
I'll expand that question. Not necessarily your own books, but where you think other authors have also done it.
Yeah, that too.
I like it when the stupidity of the person limits their power, right? Like, why does Superman slowly punch people? He can go at super speed. We just don't see it very much, right? So like, and has anyone ever thought that? Like, he can race the Flash and beat him, and yet he like dukes it out with like his other enemies, like that kind of thing, right? So I mean, and I think that there's the willing suspension of disbelief, where like by putting that in, you can either make fun of the character or it's just part of the story and it slows down the impetus.
One of mine that I was kind of proud of was the every time this character used the magic, basically there was this darkness inside him, and it kept growing and growing and growing. So the way I limited this character with his magic, because he was kind of, a little bit too powerful to begin with, was that the more he used the magic, the more he lost of himself. And so, he starts off when you're young and whatnot, and you don't give a shit, right? And so you use it all the time, and even though you're paying this cost. So as he got older and older and older, and he's supposedly lives forever, his magic becomes more and more and more limited, because if he tries to do the big powerful thing, it's basically he's going to be lost completely. So I thought that was an interesting way to limit the magic, because it brought in all these moral questions and personal moral questions essentially.
In my new series that I'm working on, it's I don't know if I call it magic, but characters can bond with these phantom creatures. The only way they can summon them is they have to physically call their name of that character. So that's a kind of different, unique way to limit it as well.
I would say in my books, it's real easy when you're using a number system to quantify everything. So if I'm saying like, hey, I can cast Fireball, sure, but you're a rank 1 novice. I want to drop a meteor on someone, I'm going to explode into meaty chunks. Yeah, I mean, we're there again. It just keeps circling back there. But there's things where like you can pick up a spell book and they say you can learn this, but you can't use it until it's this level. You can't use this it's something that is an actual game style lock on that ability, and that's a good way to limit things too.
We got a question over here, and then a question behind.
Okay, so let's say you err on the side of awesome,
Yeah.
and you're in a well-established magic system. How do you err on the side of awesome without cheapening your entire magic system?
So I'll answer that first because as the person who invoked that rule, I'll be the avatar of Brandon Sanderson and say when Brandon when he gives that example, or when he cites an example when he did this in the Mistborn series. If any of you in here have read the Mistborn series, if you haven't, that's a mistake. But
Amen.
The Mistborn series, there's a climactic battle at the end of the first book where a character uses magic in a way that is punching above their weight. They're above their level. And by all rights, they shouldn't have been able to do that according to the spreadsheet. And Brandon said, you know what, screw it, it's too good. Rule 0 applies. I'm going to err on the side of awesome, and Ben gets to do this with the mists. And that was his explicit decision to break his own magic system and just do it. And then he figured out how to justify it later. But that's an example of where he did that. I'm interested if the panel has done anything similar.
Well, I think the trick is that if you accidentally, especially with the Pantsers, if you accidentally make a character or part of your magic a little bit too strong, I think it's up to the writer to come up with some kind of way to limit that. So even though they can potentially do it, maybe you introduce something where it becomes impossible somehow for them. For example, in one of mine, all of a sudden these characters, this group of characters, figured out that they could actually blow shit up, and just with their mind basically. And nobody knew that they could do that before that. And then what happens is that once everybody realizes that they have this power, which is way bigger than any of the other powers for the magic users in this world, I ended up introducing this drug. And so the other characters end up drugging them so that they can't actually access this power and actually use it. So that's one where I made the magic users a little bit by accident too powerful. So I had to figure out some way to incorporate something else that would limit them in that particular world.
Okay, we have a question. Yep, that guy.
This is for anybody who wants to answer, but I've heard hard and soft magic, and this might be a moot point in the scope of what we're talking about today, but what about intelligent versus unintelligent magic? Is that a problem?
What do you mean when you use those words?
So say like on Harry Potter, you say reparo, it knows exactly how to fix what you're looking at.
Ah. Rowling. Let the record show we made it 35 minutes. So Brandon actually addresses Rowling by name and says that she is a hybrid of the two. She's in between hard and soft. He says that she is within a book. She's fairly hard in that you understand. She shows you a flue, you know how the flues work. Okay, that their technology for the wizards. But within the wizarding world, it's all horseshit. Right? It's all just made up. And I mean, of course, all of it's made up, but it doesn't really follow any sort of inherent systemic logic. It just sort of does whatever that story needs it to do. And that's how Brandon sort of addresses the world of Rowling. Now, as to the question you're asking, which is, I guess, how does a magic system, how important is it that the magic system sort of intuitively shortcut the inputs of the user? I'm interested in the panel's opinion on that. Dakota, you want to start?
So a big thing I do is, it is hard to say that something is definitely known, because if it is definitely known, it is science fiction, right? So it's something that is, provable by science potentially, right? So a lot of what you'll see, especially in stories, or fantasy stories, is runes, things that are kind of like the language of the universe itself, and what you're doing is passing your energy or your materials through the programming language of the universe, which, if anyone is wondering, it's Perl.
The Norse would say Python, right? Since that's we're working on it.
That explains why Devin is reading.
Totally Java.
Someone said but yeah, so what they do is they say that you are writing in the language of the universe so the universe understands you. Otherwise, what you had to do is you had to say, well, if I'm again using Reparo, right? If you're like fixing everything immediately, I would say it's more intention-based casting. So you just kind of tell the magic what you want it to do, and you kind of assume it's going to go along and listen. So yeah.
The classic anti-example of this is the monkey's paw, right?
Oh yeah.
Right, where the magic is right there in front of you, and you make it very clear what you want, but you didn't make it clear enough, and it doesn't work that way at all, right? And I think there are all sorts of examples of that, genies and the monkey's paw and things like that, where things can go awry.
But that's when they're intentionally trying to subvert you, though. So
Sometimes,
that's the smart
right.
magic of it, right?
Yeah, that's
It's like, I hear what you're saying, but no.
Sometimes,
I'm doing this.
yeah, sometimes the magic system fights back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of, in any system, you kind of have to do that, because otherwise, every time you try to cast a spell, you're going to get a lawyerly tome where you're trying to cover all the bases and define all the parameters and all that kind of stuff.
Subsection B of the spell.
Yeah.
That monkey's paw is actually the last joke in the Game of Thrones HBO, where Tyrion says, like, a dwarf walks into a bar and he says, "My wife made a joke and she wanted my dick to hang down to my knees," and they said, "Well, that's great." He's like, "Yeah, but I used to be 6 feet tall."
All right, we have this guy's question over here, and then after that we've got you back there.
Hi, I was wondering if Brandon's laws and his work have affected your own work in a direct way, and if it has, in what ways it has affected it. I was kind of curious about that.
If anybody wants to jump on that question.
I found them like about 3 books in and felt like I was adhering to them, so I was like,
I didn't know about him until I was on this panel. But in terms of just what he was talking about, I could go back and look at my work and see how I had done that, because you have to be consistent. You need to torture your characters. There's certain elements to story that are essential to telling a good story, and those elements are kind of like part of what he said the laws of magic are.
Yeah, that's basically my experience as well. I think if you are going to be a writer and you're going to write about magic systems, at some point you're going to have to essentially teach yourselves these laws, whether or not you know they've been stated explicitly somewhere. Because as you practice writing, as you write more and more, you realize that, oh, I can't do this because it destroys this, or oh, I better do this so that they're not all powerful, and things like that. So you kind of end up teaching yourself the laws, I think, as you continue writing in your magical systems. I know the stuff that I wrote when I was back in high school and whatnot, I mean, that had no laws to it whatsoever, but I taught myself, before I got published, I taught myself the laws, essentially.
Tom.
Can you all talk about your use of like gods or creatures in your books or series that just seems to be like crazy powerful for your character to deal with, and how you actually as a writer limit them, because they're not the main fixture of the book, but they add a sense of element or drama to your book, but they're just really outside the bounds of.
So I'd like to clarify that question.
Yeah.
When you ask that question, I think it's an excellent question. Do you mean for them as characters with agency, where they're actually opposed to the protagonist, or do you mean as sort of just natural forces, or both? What do you mean?
Both, because I've seen it in different ways. Sometimes they're actually directly working opposed and they're working through other agencies, or they're just some natural force that seems to be kind of pushing things along. So just really your take on how you characterize that and not have it just roll over your character.
So, panelists, do any of you guys have divine figures in your books?
So I don't have a divine figure in my book, but one of my favorite scenes from Babylon 5 is like Jafar, you know, he saves somebody, and she at the end she says, well, what was that? And he points to an ant, and he says, if I pick this ant up, and another ant saves it from me before I squish it, and says, well, what was that? He's like, how would they answer? And she was like completely dissatisfied, but I don't think there's anything wrong with you putting a theme or a character or an idea in your book where you're like, it is ineffable, right? You don't have to guide everyone along. It's actually better if you don't overly sort of mansplain to people and just sort of like let it fill in.
In my new series that I'm working on, I actually do bring in Artemis and Orion, and it's while they're alluded to a lot. It's not like the end of the first book that you actually see either one of them, but they're kind of there. They're in the background almost, kind of like the silent influencer. Same thing, kind of. I mean, Titania is not a god or anything, but she has like a similar role in the Legendary Saga. So I think it's fun to take them and have them be the background kind of characters, like kind of pushing stuff along that you don't know is there.
I'm a big believer in the battle between good and evil, and in my werewolf books, they are spiritual warriors for the good in heaven, and then they get poisoned by the bad or the evil side, and then that's what turns them into werewolves on Earth. So they end up on Earth, and they're battling the evil on Earth as they try to battle the evil inside of them that's growing. So to me, I think God is limitless, but evil has its limits. So my good is always going to overpower, win out against the evil, but the evil gets pretty darn bad. So to me, they're, those are both kind of like, I guess, God figures. And
I would say it's kind of funny you asked that, because I've been thinking about that a lot more for a potential book in the future. And I've been starting to play around with it a little bit with some short stories I've been writing recently. And so what I'm early stages on this, but what I've come up with is that one of the ways you can limit your gods, even though they might be powerful, is that, and I've seen this in other books as well, like Ari Marmel has a series where he does this, where they're limited because they have to act through somebody personally. So they are not actually doing the magic themselves, so they don't like appear and like stomp on people or whatever. But they have to act through somebody that like believes in them or something along those lines. So that's
Avatar or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one way to limit the godlike power. And then the other way you limit it is actually just use the personality of the god and say, like, why does the god care? Like what's in it for the god if they do this thing for you, and things like that. So I mean, there's got to be more ways. Like I said, I'm early stages on this, but yeah, those are just a couple examples of how you might be able to limit the god's power in a book or a novel or short story.
if you go back in history, all of the gods in history, their personalities, their weaknesses is what end up destroying them themselves, or causing their lives to be unlivable.
All right, let's take the next question here, Tom. And then after that.
I was wondering on your opinion of, in a story, a cultural's limit on magic versus the actual limits of magic. As in, a culture believed for 100 years that you cannot turn water into ice through magic, but then, say, someone from our world traveled there, through experimenting, found out, yes, you can. What's your opinion on that type of situation?
Social constraints on magic?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure we've all been told that we can't do something that we absolutely can, right? Like, I was told no one will ever read anything you write.
I think we've all heard that one.
And it's just like in anything else, what is the actual limit? And most of the time, what you're limiting is yourself. So if it's a whole society doing that, that's unfortunate, and that's